Picture a quiet study in Mexico City, 1940. A man sits at his desk reading what appears to be an ordinary document. Outside, the afternoon feels almost peaceful. Inside, years of exile and political warfare and failed assassination attempts seem, for just a moment, very, very far away. But then a trusted advisor reaches beneath his coat, and in a single instant, one of the most famous political rivalries of the 20th century reaches its violent conclusion. Nothing about that moment happened by accident. It was built through years of planning and deception and extraordinary amounts of patience. Join me today as I uncover how one carefully constructed lie succeeded where armies and prisons and revolutions had all failed. By the summer of 1940, Leon Trotsky had become one of the world's most hunted political exiles. There had been a time when he stood beside the likes of Vladimir Lenin as one of the principal architects of the Bolshevik Revolution. He organized the Red Army. He helped to shape the Soviet state and believed that history itself could be redirected by determined people like himself. But then came the struggle of power after Lenin's death. Joseph Stalin steadily removed every rival capable of challenging his authority, and Trotsky became one of the most dangerous of them all. Exile followed exile. Turkey, France, Norway, finally, Mexico. Every new destination promised some sense of safety, and every promise eventually proved to be only temporary. By 1940, Trotsky lived behind walls and guarded gates and armed security and constant suspicion. Yet there's a difficult truth about that level of fear. It cannot remain at full strength forever. Human beings simply are not built that way. Only a few months before what we can only call the final attack, armed gunmen had stormed Trotsky's home in an astonishing assassination attempt. Bullets tore through the walls and bedrooms while Trotsky and his family survived by extraordinary luck. And really, not much more than that. Afterwards, security became even tighter. Guards watched every entrance. Visitors were questioned, grilled even. Every routine changed. To an outsider, the compound looked almost impossible to penetrate. But that appearance, however, depended on one rather dangerous assumption. Everyone focused on keeping enemies outside of the walls. Very few people imagined the greater threat might already be walking through the front gate with Trotsky's permission. This is where it starts sounding like a Glass Onion movie. So the opportunity belonged to a man that was calling himself Frank Jackson. His real name was Ramon. He was a Spanish communist who had been recruited and trained by the Soviet secret police. Unlike the gunmen who had attacked with overwhelming force, he understood that violence would only matter during the final few seconds. Everything before it required patience, maybe even a touch of finesse. You see, years earlier, he had carefully constructed a false identity. He had entered the lives of the people closest to Trotsky. He developed personal relationships. He had earned confidence, and slowly, Ramon, under the name of Frank, became a familiar face rather than a suspicious one. He listened more than he spoke. He offered favors without asking for much, if anything, in return. He behaved exactly the way a trustworthy person typically would. Trust and familiarity and routine. Those three things became the strongest keys to the entire operation. By August 20th of 1940, Frank, Ramon, no longer looked like a stranger arriving at Trotsky's home. He looked like someone that they were just expecting. And that difference would matter more than the locked doors and armed guards would imagine. He arrived carrying what appeared to be a political article that he had hoped Trotsky would just review. Nothing about this request seemed remarkable or out of the ordinary. Trotsky had spent years reading manuscripts and discussing ideas and meeting supporters. It fit naturally into the rhythm of his life. Ramon followed him into the study and waited while Trotsky focused on this document and allowed the silence to kind of settle over the room while he waited for him to read. Outside, nothing seemed unusual, but inside, one man believed that he was reading another draft of a political thought. The other knew what he had been waiting years for. And it was precisely this moment. Ramon had not crossed continents, invented identities, and patiently built relationships simply to gain access to a conversation. Every careful step had led toward a single decision that would unfold in only a few seconds. By the time that Trotsky lowered his eyes to the pages in front of him, the years of preparation were at an end. The waiting was done. The only question left was whether the carefully planned assassination would succeed exactly as intended. And that answer would arrive momentarily with astonishing violence. Ramon reached beneath his coat and pulled out what most people would forever remember as an ice axe, although it was actually a shortened mountaineer's pilot, very similar to an ice axe, altered specifically so that it could be hidden beneath his clothing and swung inside of a confined room. Think about the reason that people carry sawed-off shotguns. Same reason. As Trotsky leaned over this document that Ramon had handed him, Ramon then brought the weapon down with all the force that he could muster. It must have ended everything instantly. Trotsky probably never even knew what hit him. Instead, the blow fractured Trotsky's skull, but it didn't actually kill him. He was stunned and bleeding and in unimaginable pain, but this 60-year-old man did something almost impossible. He got up and turned and grappled with his attacker. He grabbed Ramon and shouted loudly enough for the guards outside to hear him, and within moments they burst into the study, throwing themselves at Ramon with such violence that they nearly killed him where he stood without even trying. But then came one of the most astonishing moments of this entire story. Trotsky, knowing that he was mortally wounded, ordered his own guards not to kill the man who had just attacked him. He wanted answers. He understood that a dead assassin could no longer explain who had sent him or why. Even in those final moments, his instinct was to uncover the truth rather than satisfy revenge. And Trotsky was rushed to a hospital where surgeons fought desperately to save his life, but the damage was just too severe. He died the following day on August 21st of 1940, ending one of the most extraordinary and bizarre and twisted political lives of the 20th century. Ramon, meanwhile, refused to reveal who he really was. He identified himself with the false name of Frank. He invented stories and came up with other aliases and carefully rehearsed lies. Mexican investigators knew that they were dealing with something so much larger than just a personal dispute. But proving it was going to take literally years of work. Eventually, his true identity as Ramon Mercader, a trained Soviet secret agent, became impossible to hide. So Ramon was convicted of murder and sentenced to nearly 20 years in a Mexican prison. It seemed for a time that justice had reached its own conclusion, but there was one more uncomfortable chapter waiting around the corner. When Ramon walked out of prison, yes, as a free man, in 1960, he didn't disappear into obscurity as many had expected. Instead, he traveled first to Cuba and then to the Soviet Union, where the government rewarded him for carrying out this assassination. He received the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, along with the Order of Lenin, among the highest honors the nation could possibly bestow. It's difficult to imagine a sharper illustration of how governments can measure the same act by entirely different standards. To one country, he was a convicted murderer, rightfully so. But to another, he was a decorated patriot. The facts never changed, only the interpretation did. Perhaps the strangest artifact left behind was the weapon itself, too. After spending years in Mexican police evidence rooms, the shortened mountaineering pilot just disappeared into private hands before eventually it made its way to the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., where my husband and I were able to actually see this thing on our honeymoon. So Trotsky's own grandson questioned whether it was even the genuine weapon. A reminder that history doesn't always preserve certainty as neatly as one might hope. That's right. Museums might preserve objects and documents preserve testimony and memories preserve emotion, but none of them can completely reconstruct a room filled with panic and pain and irreversible decisions. And nobody could guarantee that the axe was actually the real thing. Sometimes the smallest objects carry the heaviest consequences. And sometimes one photo can tell a whole story. So if you're actually watching this instead of just listening, you can see a photo over here just to my, what is this? This is my left. And in this photo, all the way over to the far side, all the way over to the right in the photo, the man that's looking down at the woman, that's Ramon. And the woman is Trotsky's wife. And that's Trotsky standing in the middle beside her. You're looking at that photo a little differently now than you were before? I certainly did. Looking back, it becomes clear that Trotsky was not ultimately defeated by walls that were too low or guards that were too few. He was defeated by deception, patiently cultivated over many years. Ramon succeeded because he convinced people that he belonged there with them. He convinced them that he was their friend. That may be the most unsettling lesson of all. History often remembers dramatic endings, but those endings are usually built upon thousands of ordinary moments that seem harmless at the time. Revolutions reshaped nations. Dictators consolidated power. Millions of lives are altered and lost. And yet, one of the defining political assassinations of the 20th century ultimately came down to a trusted visitor carrying a few sheets of paper into a quiet study. Sometimes history does not arrive with an army. Sometimes it just knocks at the front door and smiles in your face. So what do you think was the greater danger? The enemy who announces himself openly, or the one who patiently earns your confidence and your trust until you never think to question them? Leave your answers in the comments if you will. This one might hit home for a few people. I know it did for me. I had a very trusted friend some years ago that betrayed me in one of the most brutal, disgusting, dark, backstabbing, manipulative, lying, cheating, nasty, narcissistic ways possible. When she found out I was a survivor of human trafficking, she told people that I was actually a high-priced call girl and that I was still for rent. If that's not disturbing. She was my best friend at the time, or so I thought. I think it hurts worse to know that the people that you trust the most are the ones that betray you behind your back. It's way worse than somebody that you know is out to get you coming right at your face. Anyway, if you enjoy stories like this, please make sure you do follow the History Happens with Amanda Blackwood Facebook page for more deep dives into these random historical moments. And please subscribe to the podcast. Maybe leave a review because you never know what's going to happen next. And I do apologize for me occasionally bunching up my own words and misspeaking. I have had a week-long migraine now, and it's getting old. Anyway, any like, share, follow, comment, all that stuff helps me to keep doing what it is that I do every day. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching.